today is April 6th and Saturday. I'm very happy to be here broadcasting together with Mr. Bannon. Good morning to everyone.
Greatly honored to be here, Miles, and I'm so glad we started with President Lincoln, because I have not had the chance to see you for over a month or so, but now that I see you, you've taken on the characteristics of our most famous president.
So in fact that I haven't seen Mr. Bannon for like a month now, and then only even no phone calls, and only 2 days ago we met again, and then after that we went to California together, and then he said that he loved my beard. Now, but the thing is that last night I received a phone call from my aunt. My aunt said that my uncle actually very envious about my moustache, and the thing is that, but the thing is that perhaps that I should actually take off my moustache, because a lot of the Han people, they won't have the moustache. They only have the beard in the chin. So that is why that I shave off my moustache. And then Mr. Bannon also said this morning that he loves my look, and he in fact compared it with Mr. Lincoln. So that is why I love him. He always sees the positive side of people. Okay, so that the thing is that, you know, last month that a lot of things happened internationally, and while Mr. Bannon visiting Japan, and also that he visited Europe, while that he was Japan, something happened to me, and my mother passed away, and that is why that when he called me in Japan, that he saw that I was wearing black, and he asked me what happened, and I told him, and then so that he was very concerned, he was very sad together with me, and while that he was in Europe, then he was calling me constantly. However, because my phone, I was in mornings, and my phone was given to Yvette, so he kept on asking Yvette how I was. So from Mr. Bannon, I can feel that the concern that he actually had for me, and the warmth and the passion and the filial feeling that he had, just like that we Chinese the same thing. And so that from him I can see all of that authentic feeling, and so, and then also of course I admire his long hair, and now that he admires my beard, so we are now equal.
Thank you, sir.
And also that today we're broadcasting together with Mr. Bannon. You know, the thing is that yesterday that Mr. Bannon was very busy. He was interviewed by the Fuji Broadcasting Television channel, and then but then upon hearing that we're going to broadcast today, then he said perhaps that he can join us together, because we have so many things to report to our audience. And then also that, you know, every time that we broadcast, we really did not do a lot of lengthy preparation. Only 2 days ago when Mr. Bannon and I met, and we were talking about what are we going to talk about during our broadcasting. We said, how about that we report on 6 significant issues, and so that is why that today we'll start from that. So that, you know, that the first matter that we should explore is that recently we hear there is this revival of the Committee of Present Danger. Now that this committee was chaired by a Mr. Brian Kennedy, and the deputy chairman is Frank Gaffney, and who was the assistant of Minister of the Minister of Defense, and who is also critical to taking down the Russian Soviet Union regime. And so that today, in fact, that the last 2 years that we were constantly exploring the revival of this committee, and then I have spent the last 2 years learning a lot about this committee. So today we will ask Mr. Bannon to give us a detailed illustration about the purpose of the revival of this committee, the structure of it, and then the function of the Privy Council, the Executive Council, and also the board of it.
Thank you, sir, please.
So the Committee on the Present Danger is very famous in American political history. There have been really 3. We are the 4th version of this. The first committee was in the 1950s, and it was to alert the American people to the significance of the Soviet Union's nuclear strike force. In the 1950s, people they didn't really understand how the Soviet Union had gotten so much rocket technology, and how much nuclear technology they had. So the first Committee on the Present Danger was to alert people to this possibility of nuclear annihilation. One of the outcomes of that committee, and it's not what they intended, but it got the American people thinking, and in 1960, a young, very young senator from Massachusetts ran for president against the sitting vice president. Sitting vice president was Richard Nixon. The young senator was Jack Kennedy. And Kennedy used as one of his themes this missile gap. There was a missile gap between the Soviet Union and between the United States. The Kennedy administration is very famous for what is called the Cuban Missile Crisis. And in there, the Khrushchev and the Soviets, sensing weakness by a young senator, tried to install nuclear missiles into Cuba to be able to launch onto the United States. President Kennedy, even as a young man, stood strong against them. The Russians blinked, and then Khrushchev was removed from office. The second iteration of this came after the Vietnam War. And what some strategists said is that we had spent so much time focused on the Vietnam War, we had taken our eyes off of the real enemy we had, and that was the Soviet Union in their continual buildup of nuclear weapons. And what these strategists and what these prominent people said, who are both Republicans and Democrats, they said that this time it was President Nixon, he was president by this time, and Henry Kissinger were saying that the Russians were so big and so powerful that we should reach some sort of accommodation with them. We should have détente. We should have the strategic arms limitation talks. We should have a rapprochement. We should basically make ourselves comfortable that the Soviet Union was going to dominate the world, but the United States could get along with them. And what these were led by people like Cap Weinberger, Richard V. Allen, and what they said is that we have to have a strategy to take on this radical element in the Soviet Union, that the Russian people are good people, but we have to take on this radical element in the Soviet Union that's trying to make the Soviet Union a military power to the detriment of their people and potentially confront and attack the United States. And it got the attention, this committee, by talking about the Soviet strengths and what could be done to combat this, got the attention of a former two-term governor of California who had run for president already and lost. So he was back at his ranch, semi-retired, and this committee, the Committee on the Present Danger, got the attention, and that individual was Ronald Reagan. Caspar Weinberger, Richard V. Allen, and William Casey are just three of the, Gene Kirkpatrick, four of the prominent leaders of this group, became his Secretary of Defense, his National Security Advisor, his head of Central Intelligence, and ambassador to the United Nations. It was the core of the Reagan team. Much of the thinking led to Reagan's victory in 1980 in the calling of the Soviet Union the evil empire. The ideas generated by the Committee on the Present Danger were the backbone of President Reagan's confrontation with the Soviet Union and the destruction of the Soviet Union 8 years later. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Committee on the Present Danger entered American history as one of the most important institutions in the United States about thinking about what are dangers to the world. In the early 2000s, after 9/11 and the attack by the radical Islamic Jihad, as represented by Osama bin Laden, the committee reformed. And what the committee said then is very important, that the West, and in China and the West are not at war with Islam. They're not at war with the Muslim people. But that there is a strand of Islam, this radical Islamic Jihad, that is a threat to the world. And it has been very successful in kind of guiding overall guidance, and to the fact of the Trump administration, one of the very first things that President Trump wanted to do was to basically destroy the physical caliphate of ISIS in the Middle East. So about 2 years ago, when I left the White House, I started to talk to people like Brian Kennedy and Frank Gaffney and others, that I thought it was time that we needed some committee, some sort of institutional apparatus to start to warn the people, right, in a broad scope, right, both economics, information warfare, potential military, intelligence, all of it, to warn the industrial democracies, Japan, people in the United States and Canada and Europe, of the, number one, the oppression of the people of China, right, the Chinese people, old 100 names, and also the radical nature of this cadre of President Xi and Wang Xishan and others, this radical cadre that controls China right now. People watching the broadcast today, this evening in China, should understand one thing. One of the principal reasons we're in this terrible mess is that the elites of the world, what I call the Party of Davos, the World Economic Forum in Davos, people in the City of London, you know, the Wall Street of Europe, people at Wall Street, people in corporate America and also in these international corporations, many of these international organizations, they are literally in bed with and in business with the radical cadre of the CCP. And they're doing it because they're making lots of money. Where our Rule of Law Fund that we've started basically from November, from the press conference, is to principally focus on the oppression of the Chinese people, the lack of rule of law on the Chinese people, and how the radical cadre of the CCP have essentially enslaved the Chinese people, and that the rule of law is to both investigate, to tell the stories of, and to let the world know exactly what's going on with the oppression of the Chinese people, and eventually, hopefully, for whistleblowers and others to be able to get visas, a whole package focused on the enslavement of the Chinese people by this radical cadre. The Committee on the Present Danger is actually to take a different direction and to talk about the information warfare, the economic warfare, and really the buildup of the Chinese military, which threatens potentially war in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, in the Korean Peninsula, on Taiwan, and maybe even potentially further enslavement of the people of Hong Kong. I was actually in Italy, as you know, Miles, last week when we had the initial launch, the official launch 2 weeks ago of the committee. I unfortunately was in Italy dealing with the CCP as President Xi came there to both announce a deal, or at least a memorandum of understanding, but more importantly about the Vatican, which we'll talk later in the show. But we're having the second committee meeting publicly this coming Tuesday in Washington, D.C. There'll be many prominent people going to talk at it. I will actually give also a presentation, and we will make sure that the presentation is broadcast on Guo Media live for the people in China to see.
Okay, Mr. Bannon, you have talked about a lot of a history about the CPD. Now, but then I would like to specifically ask you about the function of the Privy Council, the Executive Council, and the board of the CPD. And because yesterday, in fact, we were having this meeting with some critical personnel who was actually in position when as the national security advisor at the time of the Reagan's regime in our new office in the Himalaya Embassy. Now, but the thing is that I want to actually talk about that. Can you tell us the function more specifically about the Privy Council, Executive Council, and the board? So
we have a committee, and then we have some, Privy Council, and we have an executive committee that's going to help make decisions. The central purpose of the Committee on the Present Danger is to do both research, to do analytics of exactly what's going on, to make sure that it's not caught up in the media of any kind of partisan, political aspects, and that we're able to put forward a true story of exactly what is going on. And so that's why if you look at the initial people on the committee, people like Gordon Chang, people like Bill Gertz, you have very prominent scholars and people who write books, people who do research, people who write magazine articles, some of the smartest writers and researchers on that. Then there's another layer of kind of management, which is Frank Gaffney, it's Brian Kennedy. I will have a role in that. One of the reasons I haven't stepped up and taken a bigger role is I have a big obligation right now to the Rule of Law Fund. There's so much in the Rule of Law Fund that needs to be done as far as looking and investigating the oppression of the Chinese people, of the little guy in China. And so as the Rule of Law Fund gets going and we start to get some momentum, I will start to take a bigger role also in the Committee on the Present Danger. But we've got a tremendous group, and the principal focus is to let the world know and also to engage that we have a radical cadre. You have a group of radicals running the CCP right now. That was never intended under Deng Xiaoping. It was never intended the way things were developing. That were, we were growing together as a world in a win-win situation. That this radical cadre of the CCP, which is oppressing and enslaving the Chinese people, is also getting to be geopolitically expansionist and really coming up against Japan, in India, in the United States, and its other neighbors in East Asia. And clearly something is going to, happen in the next 3, 4, 5 years. And that's what the committee is the main purpose is to let the world know. To let the world know and to also hopefully take action to really stop this radical cadre from both further oppressing the Chinese people and from trying to right now, I think, cause much, much, much potential suffering throughout the world.
In fact, that the chairman of the CPD, Brian Kennedy, I have met with him together with Mr. Bannon for the last couple of years, and respectively in New York and DC, we explore the value of reviving of the CPD. And in fact, that Brian Kennedy was also a critical person that in the bond issuing of China from 1949 until 2019. So anyway, and then another critical person that who was involved with the CPD was a person that we had met with the last couple, yesterday and previously. I understand that this person was a critical person to bring down the Soviet Union during the regime of President Reagan, because you see, he at the time was very young and was a financier, and he was working in Wall Street, and he observed that at the time the Soviet Union's GDP income the annual income was $60 billion, and yet their expenditure was 34 billion, so they were at the brink of the bankruptcy. And so that he also observed that the thing is that they were not able to really doing all this, and yet that they were focusing on the missile development. So therefore that it was a very good opportunity, and there was this window of opportunity to actually bring down the entire Soviet Union armed force. And the history proven that he was correct, and it was realized, and he's a critical instrument behind that. And recently, he also presented with the president these documents about the Florida he also presented with the Florida's governors about the pension scheme, and then also the education scheme that the U.S. and pension fund invested in the Chinese listing companies in the U.S., and then they were actually not having been investigated sufficiently, and they have no due diligence done for it, and so he had present document into how to rectify this situation, and also that proceed towards legislation about how that they need to be done with the due diligence to prevent also all kind of a pension fund and education fund of the United States invested into these companies. And then also this kind of a project is going to be expanded towards nationally, so that in the future that we are going to see a lot of such things happening, and then to preventing the pension fund and the education fund, a lot of these are major funds investing into these Chinese corporates.
This is Miles brings up a very, very, very important point. And let me just draft off that for a second. Is that first off, there are many, many people working with the committee today that we have not publicly announced, and over the next 6 months to a year, there'll be other people that we will add to the committee in a public way. Several of the people are really financial and economic experts. And this gets back to the original power of what the Committee on the Present Danger actually did and what they did in coming into the Reagan administration. One of the central things that changed from the Reagan administration to previously is that a detailed economic analysis of the Soviet Union, and particularly the radical element that was running the Soviet Union, was done. And this individual and others came up with the fact that the Soviet economy was only half the size that people thought. And that meant that the defense expenditures took up such a huge percentage that the Soviet Union just couldn't keep going and eventually would collapse from its economics. Remember, one of the most important things that President Reagan did is that really destroyed the Soviet Union without firing a shot. Mm-hmm. And one of the central things of the Committee on the Present Danger about China is to have sophisticated individuals like this individual and others to be able to lead teams that will do a very detailed analysis of not just the CCP and this radical cadre that control the assets in China, but also actually who is working with them throughout the world. How do they sustain power? Where do they get that power from and get that support from Wall Street? Where do they get it from the City of London? Where do they get it from Frankfurt, the capital markets there? And what corporations, international corporations, are supporting them? This entire analysis, and actually down to the pension funds and others that may be inadvertently supporting them. And so this is what is going to be a very important analysis. And I think it's very directly tied to what happened in the Soviet Union. There you had also a radical cadre that controlled place and tried to totally enrich themselves. And I think that's what we're seeing in China today, the self-enrichment of the CCP off the backs of the working class and middle class people in China. And that's one of the things that we're going to get to, that the committee is going to do some detailed financial and economic analysis of that and then promulgate that out to the world.
So that you see that very good, Mr. Bannon, that your clarification about the CPD. Now that in fact the last week that I have met with 5 critical personnel of involving with the CPD, and of course I cannot disclose their names, but the thing is that we all agree that that's something very critical, which is also very critical to the rule of foundation, is that you see that former Soviet Union, and they survived on the inflation, and then that they have cultivated the illusion on that economy, and then so that they exercise a lot of the oppression to the people. But then when we're looking at today's China, in fact, that the magnitude of what they have done in these respective areas were even surpassing of that of the Soviet Union. But the thing is that though, at the time, there was no social media in Soviet Union time, and so that is why that today we have social media. We have Miles Guo, and we have Mr. Bannon, and then we have this broadcasting. We have whistleblowers, and that can help us to do a lot of things in today's China. And also that we also have great politicians today. In comparison, I believe that President Trump's capability in today's dealing with China perhaps can surpass that of the time that of President Reagan as well. And not only that, Mr. Trump, then he was aided with Vice President Mike Pence, and also that his cabinet, Mr. Pompeo, Mr. Bolton, Mr. Navarro, and Lighthizer, and all of these people get together, that we have prominent and intelligent politicians that we can aid us in our mission as well. So that is why today it is a unforeseen opportunity for us. Now, and the thing, I must also tell
你那个激情，咱不说好你要给来点激情吗？翻译奶奶。 reachable.
I must tell you, Mr.
No
Bannon.
patient.
I must tell you, Mr. Bannon, that in the past 2 years ago, for example, that I went to visit California. I went to visit different states of those tycoons and business magnates and all those prominent people. A lot of them were telling me that, they don't like Mr. Trump, they oppose Mr. Trump, and they hated you, Mr. Bannon. But today, the thing is that when I go back and talk to these people, there's a 180 degree of a change of attitude. They all embrace Mr. Trump and then they love you, Mr. Bannon. The thing is that because they can feel that your persistence in your ideology and then your passion towards what you believe in, and so that is why that they feel that is why that they are showing such a kind of admiration and a kind of positive attitude towards you today.
Please.
Well, thank you. Listen, this is the great, struggle of our time. If we ever get to the point in the next couple of years of the freedom of the Chinese people, it will be one of the most important events in human history. The entrepreneurial spirit, the dynamism of the Chinese people is unlimited. And what I point to is in the United States of America, where the Chinese people that come to the United States have total freedom. And if you see how the Chinese people have thrived in the United States, whether it's in Silicon Valley, whether it's in Hollywood, whether it's in New York City, you see this thriving of the entrepreneurial spirit of the Chinese people. And so I think that, and one of the reasons I'm so focused on this, and I've made it an important part of my life's work, is that once we get the freedom of the Chinese people and have China integrate into the international system, the world is going to be not just a much better place, it's going to be a much more prosperous place. Mm-hmm. And I think that is why President Trump, and people mocked and ridiculed President Trump when he first started this. People see that China had to do, and that's why I was just proud to be a part of it from the beginning. But we're in the very early stages of this. But this is why I think also, one of the beliefs for our audience in China, and this is one of the things that we're trying to make sure that Chinese people understand, in the United States, we just don't rely upon the government, right? The government is only a certain aspect of American life. The most important thing in American life is private life and your personal commitment to do things either in your business or in your civic life. And I think that's one of the reasons that the 7 million Chinese that are here have prospered so much, because they understand their endeavors in their business life, their endeavors in their personal life can have huge payback. And that's why both what Miles has committed and other Chinese Americans, other expatriate Chinese on the Rule of Law Fund is number one, and that's an outside independent organization made up of private people. We're taking private donations. Also, the Committee on the Present Danger. The Committee on the Present Danger is also a private, non-government affiliated entity. But that's one of the great things about America, is that we empower people in these civic kind of societies, these civic institutions that can then go do great things. And so I think that it's good to know that the tycoons and the business magnates that mocked and ridiculed Trump and were not so fond of me a couple of years ago, by your endeavors of going around and talking to people, that you see that Trump is more highly thought of, which I think is true, and that maybe they don't quite hate me as much as they used to.
Something that I have not even discussed with Mr. Bannon yet, in the last few days, and I have met with these 5 people who are the members of the CPD. Now that, and then also I met with the Privy Council, Executive Council of the arms of the CCP, and I understand about the function, the purpose somewhat, and including the person who I met yesterday, who were critically instrumental to bring down the Soviet Union regime during the 1982 era. Now the thing is, what I understand at the moment, I must state it very clearly, that is a premise that I find it unacceptable about the CPD, is that they, at the moment, stating that they are anti-China. The thing is that, you see, Miles Guo, would never go against China, go against Chinese people, or opposing anything about the Chinese people representing. You see, the thing is that I find it completely unacceptable. We are talking about that the harm was done by the small number of the cadre of the CCP. It's not even about the CCP, it's not about China, it's about the small number of the radical cadre of the CCP. So we are we oppose those small number of the radical cadre. We will never talk about anti-China, opposing China. In fact, that we love the Chinese people. We love the Chinese people working together with the US people. We love that. And then so I must solemnly, officially state that I will never work with anybody who state that they are opposing China, anti-China, and our Rule of Law Foundation would never support anyone who have such a kind of a statement saying that they are anti-China, opposing China. So, and then I am very willing to share whatever information I have, and then I would like to share my wisdom together with the people and who are opposing the small radical cadre of the CCP, but will never work together or support anyone who are stating that they oppose or anti-China. And I believe that the 5 members I met with previously now became just 4, and they would actually release some official statement and stating their position in that regard.
What's your opinion, sir?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons we're having the Tuesday meeting. People should understand, and particularly people that are watching this broadcast in China, about nomenclature. Oftentimes you see in nomenclature people say, oh, we're anti-China, or there are different organizations that are anti-China, or that the Trump administration and that President Trump is anti-China. That is just using a vernacular that's used as shorthand. What you see, and particularly in the Trump administration and the people that are focused on trying to rebalance this relationship, they have a great love for China and a great love for the Chinese people. As I've said before, I was very fortunate as a young boy, wanted to go to Asia, wanted to go to the Pacific, wanted to go to China. It's the reason I volunteered to become a naval officer. And as a naval officer, I volunteered to go to the Pacific Fleet. And in the Pacific Fleet, to go on a destroyer that was going to go in the 7th Fleet. The 7th Fleet is the fleet of the United States that patrols the Western Pacific. It patrols the South China Sea. It patrols the East China Sea. It's the fleet that goes in and out of Hong Kong. And that was the first time I was able to, meet the Chinese people in Hong Kong when I went there. And I think it was in 1977 was my first trip. So I think, if you look on the Committee on the Present Danger, these are people who have a great fondness for China, have a great fondness for the Chinese people. The situation we find ourselves in is, and there was no, problem with Deng Xiaoping and all the growth that China did after the end of the Cultural Revolution, and particularly after the death of Mao Zedong, when China came out of this horrible period they had during the Cultural Revolution. And so I think you'll find on the CPD, and we'll make sure the nomenclature gets changed, but people in the United States that are focused on what has to happen in China are focused maniacally on the CCP, and particularly what I call this radical cadre, and the radical cadre being personified by President Xi and really more by Wang Xishan. I mean, Wang Xishan is, as you know, Michael Bloomberg took him to Singapore and said he's the most powerful guy in the world. Wherever you look, he's all over the place. But that radical cadre is, quite frankly, the enemy. It's principally the enemy of the Chinese people. It's the enemy of what I call old 100 names, which is the terminology we use for the common man and woman in China. And so they are the enemy of the Chinese people, and quite frankly, I think the enemy of mankind. And as we'll talk more in the show later about the deal with the Vatican, what's happening with the Uyghurs, what's happened, and as you expose on our New Year's Eve, our Chinese New Year's Eve show, what they've done to the Dalai Lama. And there's just been some terrible news about the Dalai Lama over the last week regards to the CCP. So people should understand if they ever hear the vernacular that these groups or that the Trump administration or the people in Trump administration are anti-China, what the interpretation is they're the anti-CCP, and not even the entire CCP, but the kind of this radical cadre of I think under 1,000 people who actually make the decisions and take all the wealth in China.
Mr. Bannon said that, from the broadcasting responses, and then there were a lot of concern about the funding of the Committee of the Present Danger. I would like you to use the most simple terms to tell us that exactly where the funding of the CPD is from, and also what is its relationship with the present government regime.
Yeah, so it has no, the Committee on the Present Danger is a private entity. It's a not-for-profit. And so far it has no relationship. The predecessors, both the one in the 1950s, the one in the 1970s, the one in the early 2000s, never had any government assistance or government funds. You have prominent people who have either been in government before or oftentimes go to government afterwards, particularly as they kind of lay out these programs. But it has no relationship. It's a totally private entity funded by private individuals. So far, we really haven't gone out and done any fundraising. Everybody's a total volunteer. The first events we've had, spaces essentially been given to us to have those spaces. We will start to raise money later this spring. But here's the thing about the Committee on the Present Danger. Things like this don't take an awful lot of money. The people that we have coming on board are experts in their own fields, and there will have to be some expenses that we'll have to put up. But this is not something that you have to raise a tremendous amount of money on, but it's a private enterprise, and people in our audience in China should understand that when they hear something from the Committee on the Present Danger, understand it's a private institution. It's a kind of a collective. It's a committee, and it's made up of experts in various areas, but it has nothing to do and no relationship with government, with the government or government policy. Although we will definitely make recommendations about to the government and to Congress and to the president and to other people about recommended areas of where we think that the government ought to focus on its relationship with the CCP.
Okay, so that for the matter of the Committee of Present Danger, then we put a full stop here today because we have a lot of other matters that we need to discuss. So, Mr. Bannon, a lot of people concerned about the U.S., trade negotiation, this topic, right? Now, because that we see that Mr. Liu came back to the White House yesterday, and then in fact that he was actually sitting together with Mr. Trump, and then in the White House, and it's not even opposing, sitting at the opposite position. It's not like that they are negotiating anymore. It's like a very friendly, everybody's talking, everybody's laughing, it's a very cordial atmosphere. Now, but the thing is that, but of course that we understand that it might be a ridiculous joke, because in the past that they were like stalling, because I understand that Chinese government, they had a lot of seemingly information that Mr. Trump would be impeached, and then a lot of trouble is going to be happening for him, for his family, then it's going to be the end of his government, his end of his re-election. So the thing is that they are stalling, but nothing happened, as we can see that from the Mueller's report, that it claimed that there is nothing happened, so that he's not going to be impeached, and so on and so forth. And so that China realized that, okay, so that they have to do something now, and that cannot be just stalling. And then so suddenly that they are talking about a lot of the areas in China is going to open for the U.S. corporate, and then cyber industry is going to be gradually open. But of course, we understand that is also the ploy of stalling, and Lighthouse is not going to be tricked. So can you actually tell us, in your opinion, what has happened in that negotiation and what is going to happen in the next?
Look, this negotiation is as important to the audience in China as it is to the audience in the United States and throughout the world. One of the reasons that you don't have rising wages in China and better fairer distribution of wealth and distribution of income is because of the way that the CCP, this radical cadre of the CCP, controls the means of production and really controls all assets. As you know from, and Miles, you know better than anybody, but if you're an entrepreneur in China, if you're a businessman in China, if you're someone in China, a worker that wants to have a stake in something, that wants to own something, the CCP can come in at any time and just say, hey, that's ours, and just take it back. One of the central things of what President Trump has been trying to do is to try to make sure that China starts to integrate into the world's system, into the world's economic system. You have to ask yourself a very simple question. Why are the Chinese people and Chinese Americans that literally come to the United States with nothing, right? With no assets, not speaking the language, not realizing and understanding the culture, in a place like the United States is very tough. The United States is a big country and it's very go-getting and very tough. And for people that have been here for generations, how are the Chinese people so successful? How do they come here to a country where, their relatives or their families have been in China for millennia, for thousands of years? And they, in all likelihood, many cases have not been able to accumulate any wealth, have not been able to accumulate any economic security, have not been able to put anything away for their families and for future generations, and haven't had anything to be able to pass down to future generations. And you have to ask yourself, when you see the Chinese here in America, they're among the most successful people we have. They're some of the best entrepreneurs. They've built some of the best companies. They've created a lot of wealth. They're now giving back to society. They're starting civic organizations. They're starting to become fully ingrained in American life. And why is that? It's one thing. It's freedom. The Chinese people, when they have freedom, and that is freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, when they have freedom, they prosper, right? And part of that freedom, a central part of that freedom, is called property rights. And this is that when you own something, you actually own it. And when you own it, you can build it, you can grow it, you can sell it, you can finance around it, you can pass it to your children. You essentially can do anything you want with it because it's yours. And nobody can kind of come and take it from you. So let's do that and then we'll continue on.
Yeah.
And this is what President Trump's trying to do. This negotiation is much more than when you read about the press about just the United States selling more soybeans or more cattle or more raw materials to China. It's much deeper than that. It is about the structural changes to the Chinese economy that President Trump is trying to do. And those are about forced technology transfers, about intellectual property rights. It's about state-owned industries. But at the end of the day, what it is to have a more equitable system on both sides, not just for the West, but also for the Chinese people. One of the things that's going on in China that's very evident is that the radical cadre of the CCP, and you can tell with what they're trying to do with liberty, they have suppressed liberty, right? And in suppressing liberty, they've done it by suppressing the rights of the Chinese people. You are essentially economic slaves to their apparatus. And that is why, and one of the things I'm proudest of in Rule of Law Fund and the work that Miles Kwok has done, Miles has shown how the leaders, the radical leaders of the CCP, are not communists at all, right? In fact, they are what I call state capitalists. They take and extract as much money from the people of China, and what they do is they money launder it into the West. That's why there's so much real estate in New York City. The very city that we're sitting in today, you folks in China should understand, much of it is owned by the radical cadre of the CCP because they've laundered this money out. Miles's great investigation into H&A, shows you that they've taken a regional airlines that was owned by the people, partially owned by the people of Hanai, the region where the airline came from. And now that it's $1 trillion company, we find out, as Miles was able to show, that 52% of it is owned by these private foundations controlled by Wan Shishan, right? And so you have to ask how that happens. And it just gets to be a money laundering situation where they extract wealth from China, and they money launder it into the West so they can put money here because they're more comfortable that this is a safe economy and they can hide their money over here after essentially stealing it from the Chinese people. These negotiations, when you talk about the structural changes, and particularly the state-owned industries, is to make sure that you can actually, at the end of the day, unlock over the long term the economic value of China, but to have the ownership be with the Chinese people, not with the radical cadre of the CCP, so that Lady Liberty is not encompassed by a bunch of radical communists, but in fact is the Lady Statue of Liberty, the beautiful Statue of Liberty that we see right here in New York Harbor, a few miles from where the Guo Media Studios are in Midtown Manhattan.
Also mentioned about the Statue of Liberty, right? Now, in fact, that we see the two statues in the front, and they were actually designed by myself at the time 2003 to 2004. I told the maker of the Statue of Liberty, the family of that, the family of the maker, the Abanini, and then I told them about my idea of the creation of the design of this Statue of Liberty. But you see, the green one is basically signifies that China is raping the Western culture. You see the first one, the green one, right? And I said that the idea is that China is going to rape the Western culture with the Chinese idea. That is why the Green Statue of Liberty was carrying the Chairman Mao's book. And then also at the back of that Statue of Liberty, we can see the stamp of the maker of the Statue of Liberty, the family of it, right? And then but then the second one that I actually made that 10 years ago. And at the time, I told them about my idea, and they dared not to put their family stamp at the back of the Statue of Liberty again because they were so scared of it. And that was the Statue of Liberty wearing the red flag of China. And then also that the flag is already covering up the Constitution, which was actually held in the Statue of Liberty's hand. That is to say that China has already successfully raped the culture of the US and the Western, and so that is why that is all red now. And then you see that I have, in fact, that I have another statue, which was a life-size statue, in fact, larger than life. It's 3.7 meter high, and then it's made with bronze. And that was still not being delivered to me because, you see, the design of it is quite very interesting. And in fact, I think it's full of dynamics. And you see, the holding in the hand of the Statue of Liberty was not the Constitution of the US. Instead, it's a Chinese Constitution. And half of it is a US legislation, the acts of it. And then also on the feet of the Statue of Liberty, one shoe was the red shoe, which was worn by the people when they were having the long march in China. And the other foot was wearing the Wall Street, shoe. And then the face of it, the face of that Statue of Liberty was actually the face of Wang Qishan. And so you see, that was, I thought that was a great idea of the design, but then you see the thing is that they were still holding my statue and they would not deliver it to me. So that you see that in the matter of the negotiation between the China and US trade, in fact, the crux of the problem is that there was something, the fundamental I need to share, but then before that, I have shared I would need to share this anecdote with the people. And that is like that, 2 days ago, last week I was in California, and I was supposed to be testifying for a prosecution occasion. I cannot disclose that, but the thing is that we know the following up, there are a lot of the relevant Chinese people going to be prosecuted. But anyway, that at the entrance of that, there was this, the police and the agent, he was giving me, he shook my hand and gave me a hug, and he said, thank you for letting us know about this, the event in Mar-a-Lago, that we need to be paying attention to some of the assassins, so that is why that we were able to arrest this these are female assassins whose intention might be assassinating Mr. Trump or stealing a lot of the information. The thing is that he was saying that, he said to me that, you know, the Chinese government and their idea is too low level, then you know, using the Chinese female assassin. And then so I said to him that, you know what, that is exactly the crux of the problem, and that is exactly the crux of the problem about this U.S.-China trade negotiation, is that U.S. people, U.S. politicians, U.S. government always thinking that, you know, thinking in a too high level way, because we need to concern about the ethics, the morals, human rights, religions. We cannot affront any of these aspects, and then we need to be considerate of all of these issues. And that is why that whenever we think something, that we need to take a very high level away of thinking of things. But the thing is, the Chinese government, they don't have such concern at all. They can use as low as a trick, as the dirtiest of trick as possible. And that is why that they are really rapists. They are mafias. They are, in fact, the criminal organization. So we must not think of them in too high a level, because then we would never be able to do anything about them. So that we must understand that basically whatever they say is really a lie. They are creating a scam for us. So that is why that, and then when I said that to Mr. Bannon, then Mr. Bannon said, so what can we do? Should we become as lowly as them? Can we be as dirty as them? Then I say, no, of course not. We can never stoop so low. We must maintain our own dignity, and we must maintain our moral consideration. We must still maintain our respect on the human rights and all kinds of high ground. But we must understand how low they become, and so that we need to know our enemy.
So, please.
And this is why these are such great symbols, is that it is understanding that the CCP and the radical cadre of the CCP are exactly like Mussolini. They're exactly like the Soviet Union. They're exactly like Hitler and the Nazis. All of these, the ground of all of these, they're all criminal enterprises. They think like criminals. They move and they steal from the little person like criminals, right? They have a criminal mentality. And the issue, the problem, is that where you have the Statue of Liberty, which is a very powerful symbol for freedom, and has been a symbol given to us by the French government and by the French people to honor the 100th anniversary of our freedom, which we would not be free if it was not for the assistance of the French people at the time to help us break off from the British Empire, that we can lose all these freedoms, you know, very quickly. And one of the reasons is that people who should know better in the United States, in the West, the elites in our country, the Wall Street people, the people in the City of London, the corporations, the wealthy, the cultural elites that have been in business, the way that we see the rape of the Statue of Liberty is because, not simply because the CCP is a criminal organization and that the radical cadre of Wang Xishan and Xi are criminals and think like criminals and oppress their people, whether it's the Uyghurs or the Tibetan Buddhists or the underground Catholic Church or the evangelical Christians or just the common man, old 100 names in China, but that it's aided and abetted by the elites in the West. And that's what to me is unacceptable. And that's one of the reasons that, given my great love for the symbolism of the Statue of Liberty, that I've dedicated my life to make sure that this will never happen. And I agree that until Trump came along, the United States was really asleep to this issue of how far the radical cadre of the CCP had started taking control of really American industry in the economy of the United States, and made us essentially a tributary state to them. We were Jamestown to their Great Britain. President Trump has stopped this. That's why these negotiations are so important. That's why they're so meaningful That's why I don't happen to think they're going to get concluded anytime soon. They may, but I think if you have to go out and really get them done to the execution way and to make sure that this never happens to the United States, it's going to take a while. But we'll see that all in the coming weeks, and I'm sure we'll be back reporting this on the show as we go along. One last thing I want to say about Mar-a-Lago, that we had a terrible incident in Mar-a-Lago this week. You know, Miles is a member. He's one of the wealthy elites who's a member at Mar-a-Lago. But we had a terrible incident down in Mar-a-Lago where a woman from China, actually got into Mar-a-Lago, and she had a number of sophisticated devices that may have been able to either mess up the communications down there or whatever. But it shows you once again how you've got to be completely vigilant on every step of this.
I'm not going to verbatim interpret what he said, because a lot of that actually that you have known before, but I'll just give you a drift, a little bit of a drift of what he said at the last. It's just that that we've talked about that the China-U.S. negotiation, and then it takes a long time, but then the thing is that there are a lot of the talk about that the pension fund and all those are going to actually not invested in the Chinese SOEs, but that we welcome the private enterprise of China coming, and because the people are diligent and the people are very passionate, and then they are very good people, peace-loving people, and a lot of the U.S. entrepreneurs and the magnates, and then in the past they dislike you, but now that they see that you are also very diligent, persistent in your passion, and then you love China, and then you're helping the people, and so that they have changed their attitude altogether, and then they are going to invest and donate, and hoping that to help Chinese people to build this great ecosystem for the Chinese people to be free, and then also that they hope that the China, and that they definitely need to open up the cyber system, the cyber industry, the technology, and so that we need to able to manage the cyber control, the hacks and all that. And so that we also need to make sure that China to build this a free society and free country for the Uyghurs, for the Christians, for the Tibetans, and so that everybody can be protected, and so that we can thrive and prosper. And all the donation made to the Rule of Law Foundation definitely is going to have invoice, and so this is based, and then we are going to build a human-led embassy, not only in the US, but then also in California, in the DC, so we have a meeting place, and we have these focal locations, and then to help us to do that. And then we have a lot of people standing together with us in the US. We have different battleground, not just in China, and so therefore that we have a lot of battle lines and a lot of supporters. And these people, they don't like the CCP radical cadre, but they love China, and they love Chinese people, and they love the Chinese culture, and they're going to give us a lot of a donation, and then also they stand together with us. As I was just saying that, we have a lot of a donation in the Rule of Law Foundation, but my donations is accounted for 70% of the total donation, but at the same time that we are seeing a lot of the major donations happening. Some people from Hong Kong, and then also from the US, 100 million and 300 million, and they are on the coming. So, but anyway, that we are going to see a lot of that, and then we are going to send out invoice for everyone to acknowledge and officiate all the donations. But we have very restricted of a time. In the interest of time, we ask you to wrap up and then to give us the final words about what's happening and what you're going to see, and a lot of the discussion can be carried out later on.
Well, as you know, we're in the middle of this intense negotiation led by President Trump. The trade deal is what everybody over here is talking about. We'll see how that plays out the next couple of weeks. I just got back from Italy, and we'll discuss this in more depth later. But this deal that the Vatican did with the CCP is absolutely unacceptable. There's now been a lot of anger about it in Rome and throughout the world as Catholics and Christians start to understand what the Vatican's done and cutting a deal, a secret deal with the most radical elements of the CCP. That's Xi and Wang Xishan, which is, this deal is unbelievable in the fact that it's been kept secret. We believe one of the reasons it's kept secret is because of the fact that it talks about a process of full diplomatic relationships between the Vatican and the CCP. And our point is that the CCP as a institution has promulgated forced abortions onto the Chinese people for many, many decades. And it's just, it's unacceptable that the church would then cut a deal. So we'll talk about that in the future. There's a lot going on. Rule of Law Foundation, we've got the Committee on the Present Danger in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill on Tuesday, and then a lot more going on with happening in Italy and Europe and Brazil. I'll be able to report next time we broadcast about President Bolsonaro in Brazil and what the CCP is trying to do down there. So this is a global battle, and we're going to be involved in it all over the world. I'd just like to say that I hope that one day, Miles, that since the French people who helped the Americans attain their liberty in 1776 as our partner that helped us free ourselves from the British Empire, and then honored the United States with this magnificent statue that sits in New York Harbor, and Miles has seen it many times. It's awe-inspiring to see the Statue of Liberty in the harbor with her torch. That I would hope one day that the United States, on the 100th anniversary of the freedom of the Chinese people, that we would be able to donate a statue of the Statue of Liberty to the Chinese people to commemorate the 100 years of their freedom.
So definitely thank you, Mr. Bannon, for giving us this suggestion. I hope that we can see a new Statue of Liberty coming to China. But of course, that is a different look of a Statue of Liberty and a different kind of a design. But that definitely we will have your name engraved on it, and then also all of our warriors' names and
Bannon here.
So thank you very much. And then I must also say this to everyone that, Mr. Bannon is going to be doing a lot of things, and he's going to be so busy because he is responsible for a lot of the events of the Rule of Law Foundation. And then since he is a chairman of the Rule of Law Foundation, and another is that Mr. Calbaza, although that he's not with us in this meeting, there are a lot of things going to happen, and the Rule of Law Foundation belongs to the United States and the people of the United States. It representing lots of the freedom, and then also the justice and the liberty the United States fight for the Chinese people. And it is a non-profit, independent, private entity. And then the thing is that they are fighting for the freedom and the religious freedom and the liberty of the Chinese people. Thank you. And in fact, Mr. Bannon's office is located on the 3rd floor of this Himalaya Embassy building, and Calba's office is located on the 5th floor of this building. And at the end of April, perhaps in May, we're going to invite a lot of our allies and our warrior friends coming to visit our Himalaya Embassy, and perhaps to have a broadcasting event in here, and Mr. Bannon would be able to receive some of the interviews at the time. And so, but a lot of the details could be published later on. Allow me to give you a little bit of the details about why we named this building the Himalaya Embassy. In fact, that's a lesson taken from Mr. Bannon. You see that when I visited Mr. Bannon in Washington, D.C., and his office actually located in a townhouse, and the building is called Breitbart Embassy. I said, why embassy? Because it signifies that we are different from the government, and we are foreign. We enter into this soil, but we are independent. So that is why that is embassy. So I hope that we in the future, we're creating the city of Himalayas. And then we are foreign in the city, but that we are independent, but we are part of it. So we now pray for the 1.4 billion Chinese people that they can actually get away from the oppressive ruling of the radical cadre of CCP, and also that we pray that the US and Western countries can also get out of the radical cadre's shadow.
阿弥陀佛，谢谢老战友们，谢谢班农先生的到来，非常感谢，非常感谢。
Next time, Miles.
Every time that I give Mr. Bannon a hug and kisses, I was very excited because that you see that you have such a childlike and innocent face. That is very sort of like made me feel that very much the best. And I believe that we both have the mission from God. And then I don't think that we will have our sanity if we don't believe in this mission from God and our cause in our life. So that in fact that last time we had this broadcasting and that was temporary and that was a brand new team, and so it was the worst of our experience. But of course even today is still temporary because in the future everything is going to be controlled by automatic robotics and intelligence, and then also that is going to be 24/7 with the broadcasting happening. And so I must say that in the future this is going to be the home for all of our friends, allies, and when they are having a meeting in here and when they're coming to see us. And so thank you.
Thank you, sir. 再见。好，今天很成功啊，很成功。谢谢川姨奶奶，谢谢川姨奶奶翻译的川姨。Look at this! Wow! Look at this! Look at this! Andrew, thank you, Andrew.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rosh.